Hi, this is Gordon Hisayasu, and this is chapter 3 of the video series of how science reveals God's creation. And basically, I don't have a title yet for this because I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to let this evolve this time. I told you it was going to be a little bit different last time. And what I want to do is I want to try to talk to you about my process of understanding God as the creator, uh, and how science played a role in that. And so I want to be a little bit more honest about the way I think about things, and it starts out probably pretty controversial to a lot of Christians, probably, because one of the things that I don't do, and I can't do easily as a scientist, is believe that God is a magician. I don't look at the creativity and everything as God using magic. And there's some things that indicate that. I mean, God used the flood, in Noah's time to punish human sin, and he used plagues in Moses, and most of those are understandable as natural occurrences. And Sodom and Gomorrah, you can easily look at that as probably a meteor or an asteroid causing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not something you can say that magic didn't exist. It's just that trying to understand the mechanisms of creation as man is trying to do, you become more and more aware of the ingenuity and the basically power that God has to be able to create and design and be the architect of creation. And that makes a God much different to me and much more amazing to me than a lot of things that even the Bible, the Bible says that the heavens will proclaim the glory of God. And that's true, the heavens have. But science has done the same thing in many, many ways, and so basically I like to try to look at things that way. And in the same way, I look at science a lot different than, of course, a scientist would, because I look at science as just a bunch of theories. I look at it as man trying very hard to understand, what life is all about, what the universe is all about, and it's kind of bad because we really haven't done as good a job as many scientists believe. I think that we ask a lot of questions and answer a lot of questions of what is happening, what the universe is, the Big Bang, DNA, all kinds of things of what happened, and but we don't really give you a great explanation at all of how these things really happened and what and why they really happened, especially. And that's really where my faith in God comes in. And so I find out that as opposed to science and as opposed to even the Bible, I need to trust in God because I have many questions. And probably a lot of this talk is going to be based on questions, not necessarily answers. I talked in the past about some of the common things that people look at, that either prove or disprove the existence of God. And, this was the fine tuning, and this is the existence of a brain. I left out in fine tuning on something that I kind of want to discuss a little bit more in detail, and you'll get kind of idea how speculative my mind can get, and a little bit of idea how basically off the wall sometimes I get. But basically, tectonics is something that occurs, as far as we know, only on the planet Earth. We have a lot of planets to look at, I know, but we know as far as we know, it only occurs, and that means that our crust basically moves against each other. It's a thin crust, and it moves, and that's what caused the land masses to occur. So we're not totally a blue planet. We're also a little bit green, in fact. And it also causes a lot of the conditions that we need for life also. And I could have put these into the home talk, but I want to extend it a little bit more. You know, there's a thing called homeostasis that you study as a physiologist. You know, how the body basically adjusts. You know, when it gets too hot, you're going to sweat. The sweat will evaporate and cool your skin off. You know, and if you get too cold, you get little goosebumps. You know, and those things are supposed to help you retain temperature a little bit more. You know, so your body's constantly doing tons and tons of different things to adjust so that you basically live more comfortably. Plate tectonics also did that. You know, besides the idea that it formed our crust, it also acted as a thermostat essentially to us. You know, it created the big discrepancies we have between becoming an ice age and becoming a too hot planet like Venus because of greenhouse effects. You know, so the way that the scientists have looked at it is they've looked at it how these volcanoes have created the CO2 that causes this atmosphere that causes a greenhouse effect and really warmed us up. I think in 700 and something million years ago, we had what we were called the snowball planet. Our planet was completely covered with ice, you know, a giant ice age, if you want to call it that. You know, and that would have been a state that would have existed. And part of the idea that we got out of this, the ice melted and everything, it's partly because of plate tectonics. It really helps our planet, you know, evolve. It's hot and cold, gets too hot, then we have ways to get it to cool down. You know, the very idea of the evaporation of water, which, you know, we're 71% of, you know, helps cool the planet from the overheating that would really occur with the sun if we didn't have water. So there's all kinds of little details that you look at. And if you want to look at it, you can say, wow, what a lucky planet we are. And boy, these are just big old coincidences. You know, I think I've heard the term cosmic coincidences at times. And it was like, you know, what are we talking about now? We're talking about the idea that we can live and we are alive because of these things. But one of the things that I read recently about was this idea that some of the scientists are looking at the idea that volcanoes, you know, plate tectonics causes earthquakes and volcanoes. But these volcanoes might have been the cause of all these major extinctions that we had, mass extinctions we call them. We've had 5 of them and they're a mass extinction if over 75% of the species are killed by this. You know, and that was a really interesting aspect to me because I can look at mass extinctions in the same way that, say, Darwin would look at. You know, I look at natural disasters and the natural environments of climate and everything else, controlling actually how the world became just right for us. You know, and you can look at it in a bunch of different ways. Before the first mass extinction, which I think was in 444 million years ago, they had this thing called the Cambrian explosion. And the reason it was an explosion is because the scientists, basically looking at fossils from rocks, said that through a 70 to 80 million year period, there was such a large expansion and diversification of species, the most high amount of species in you know they've ever encountered, all of a sudden came into being, and it was a very rapid acceleration of the introduction of new species, and they don't have any idea of any what they call the antecedents to it. You know, the ancestors. They just all of a sudden appeared. You know, one of the things I wanted to read, and I'm sure you haven't heard this too much, is that rapid appearance is what Darwin said is the main objection to natural selection. And then he later on says, you know, I can give no satisfactory answer to it. And it's really strange because to this day, I have not heard a satisfactory answer to that. But the idea of mass extinctions becomes really interesting to me because I don't hear too much about it in terms of these evolutionary trees and things. The Great Dying was an extinction that occurred in 252 million years ago. And what it had was 96% of the species disappeared. Okay, so you look at 96 of the species disappearing, but if you look at the scientific view of evolution, then we were basically that remaining 4%. So luckily we weren't part of that 96%, or we might look more like, this Cambrian thing. It was, the thing I don't know if you've seen those little crab-like trubberlites or something that they have in fossils. They see them all over the place. And, maybe we would have looked more like that if there was no mass extinctions occurring. But the mass extinctions, 5 of them occurring, means that, the next one, 86%, that means 16% of it still survived. And, you all know the great 65 million years ago when supposedly an asteroid destroyed the dinosaurs, and I look at it as how God is in control of everything, how God controls everything. Because I saw a movie recently about Godzilla, and primitive man would not dominate the world or dominate the earth if dinosaurs exist. A little bone arrow or a rock spear or something is not going to kill a dinosaur. And we would be basically probably pretty wiped out. So these mass or natural disasters really are the things that controlled who we are and what we are and how the world is today and how we can live in this world today. And this is kind of the tone that I want to talk about, because there are so many little things like this that I wonder about, and I don't understand. And these are the things that really convince me there is a God. It's just the opposite of, a scientist would never say that there's magic. They're going to say, well, we'll figure it out. We'll find out what really causes this and how it really works. We have not come very close to that as scientists of the world. And it's actually a little bit arrogant, because we come further and further away from that in many ways. But there are many, many things, cosmic coincidences and questions, that really lead you to God. It's not always the answers, it's the questions. And science has their answers, but their answers are usually theories, and I know a little bit about science, and I know that once they make a theory, they'll spend a lot of effort and a lot of money and a lot of time trying to prove those theories. I don't know how much money we've spent so far looking for WIMPs, which is supposed to be our answer to dark matter. But we are continually searching, but there is definitely a big idea of knowing God through the questions that not only do we find, but that we create. And I'll talk a little bit more along those lines, because I want to talk about things like photons, and I want to talk about gravity and time and mass. I don't know how much time and effort I'll be able to put into those, but that's kind of the tone that I want to go into in these chapters, the next chapter, or as a continuation of this chapter. Thank you.